The spotlight burned white-hot against Susan Thompson's skin. She turned as the gown shifted, the shoulder strap slipped. For 3 seconds, the small of her back was exposed under the harsh stage lights. A crimson brand seared into dark skin, elegant and violent, like calligraphy written in blood. Front row, seat 7. Park Ji-hoon's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. His entire body went still. That mark. He knew that mark, his family's mark. The woman on stage didn't belong in the light. She belonged in a file, a ledger. She was supposed to be invisible. But here she was, radiant, terrified, and utterly exposed. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. His eyes tracked her every movement as the strap was adjusted, the brand hidden once more beneath silk and shadow. Someone had made a terrible mistake. And that mistake was about to cost them everything. The gallery charity auction in Itaewon was Seoul's most exclusive event of the season. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, old money, and new fortunes mingling under the guise of philanthropy. Susan Thompson hated every second of it. She wasn't supposed to be on stage. She was a photographer. Behind the lens, behind the scenes, behind the curtain of anonymity she'd carefully constructed over 2 years of hiding. But the agency was understaffed. A model called in sick. The coordinator begged. And Susan, desperate to keep her freelance gig, reluctantly agreed. Just one walk, just jewelry, just tonight. She told herself it would be fine. It wasn't fine. Under the spotlights, her heart hammered against her ribs. The audience was a blur of faces, each one a potential threat. She moved mechanically, shoulders back, chin high, every muscle screaming at her to run. The emerald necklace at her throat felt like a noose. She pivoted. The gown shifted. The strap slipped. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not at the brand, most didn't see it, but at the momentary wardrobe malfunction. Susan's hand flew to her shoulder, adjusting the fabric with practiced speed, her expression never faltering. But in the front row, Park Ji-hoon saw everything. 34 years old, tech billionaire, philanthropist, and beneath the polished exterior, a man born into Korea's criminal underworld, carrying secrets that could topple empires. He came to these auctions for the art, the anonymity, the distance from his family's legacy. Tonight, that distance collapsed. The brand on her back was unmistakable. The crimson lotus, his aunt's signature, burned into the flesh of every woman and child, trafficked through the Park family's smuggling network. He'd spent years trying to distance himself from that world, built a legitimate empire, kept his hands clean. But that mark brought it all flooding back. The woman on stage wasn't a model, she was a survivor, and if she was here exposed, she was already being hunted. Susan fled to the dressing room the moment the auction ended. Her hands shook as she peeled off the gown, replacing it with jeans, a hoodie, and the comfortable armor of invisibility. She was about to slip out the service exit when a voice stopped her cold. Susan Thompson. Her blood froze. She turned slowly. Park Ji-hoon stood in the doorway, immaculate in a tailored black suit, his expression unreadable. "You know my name," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her throat. "I know more than that." He stepped closer, deliberate but not threatening. "I know what that mark on your back means. I know who put it there, and I know you're in grave danger." Susan's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." His gaze was intense, searching. "The Crimson Lotus, my family's syndicate. You escaped them, but tonight you put yourself back on their radar." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "I can protect you," Ji-hoon continued. "I have resources, security, places they can't reach." Susan laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing." His voice softened. "Just to keep you alive." She studied him, this stranger who knew too much, whose eyes held something she couldn't quite place. Guilt? Concern? Attraction? It didn't matter. "I handle my own shadows," Susan said firmly, slinging her camera bag over her shoulder. "That's a mistake." "Maybe." She moved past him toward the exit. "But it's mine to make." Ji-hoon didn't stop her, but as she disappeared into the Seoul night, he made a decision. He would keep her safe, whether she wanted him to or not. Before we continue, can I ask you a question? Where in the world are you watching from? Comment below because we'd love to know how far these stories travel. And hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories. I'll really appreciate it. All right, thank you. Let's jump back in. 1 week later, Susan's paranoia had become a living thing. She felt eyes everywhere, on the subway, in the convenience store. Outside her cramped studio apartment in a neighborhood tourists never visited. She took different routes home, wore hats and sunglasses, checked reflections in shop windows. But still, the feeling persisted. You're being watched. She tried to convince herself it was trauma, PTSD, the ghosts of a past she'd fought so hard to escape. She was wrong. The syndicate had spotted her at the auction, and they were closing in. Rain hammered the streets of Itaewon, turning neon signs into blurred watercolor smears. Susan finished a photography gig at a small cafe, packing her equipment with practiced efficiency. The owner paid her in cash, no paper trail, no questions. That's when she saw him, a man in a dark jacket loitering across the street, pretending to smoke, watching. Her pulse spiked. She exited through the back, cutting through narrow alleys slick with rain. Her sneakers splashed through puddles as she moved faster, the weight of her camera bag digging into her shoulder. Behind her, footsteps echoed. More than one set. Susan broke into a run. The alleys twisted and turned, a labyrinth she'd memorized over 2 years of paranoid mapping. She ducked under awnings, vaulted over trash bins, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But they were faster, organized. She turned a corner and hit a dead end, a brick wall topped with barbed wire, graffiti screaming down at her in Korean. "No, no, no, no!" 2 men emerged from the shadows behind her, blocking the alley. One smiled, slow and predatory. Susan's hands clenched into fists. She wouldn't go quietly. Not again. The men stepped forward. Then, headlights flooded the alley. A black sedan roared around the corner, tires screeching, and skidded between Susan and her pursuers. The passenger door flew open. "Get in!" Ji-hoon's voice cut through the rain. Susan didn't hesitate. She dove into the car. Ji-hoon accelerated before the door even closed, the vehicle fishtailing as it shot out of the alley. Behind them, the men shouted, scrambling for their own vehicle. Susan twisted in her seat, breathing hard, rain dripping from her hair. "You were following me," she accused. "Yes." Ji-hoon's eyes stayed on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. "And you're welcome. I didn't ask. You turned me down." He glanced at her, his expression intense. "See where that got you?" Susan's retort died in her throat. Because he was right. Ji-hoon's apartment was a fortress disguised as luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering sprawl of Seoul, minimalist furniture, art on the walls worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. And security, subtle but everywhere. Cameras, reinforced locks. A guard stationed discreetly in the lobby. Susan stood in the center of the living room, soaked and shaking, her arms wrapped around herself. "You should shower," Ji-hoon said quietly. "There are clothes in the guest room. We'll talk after." She wanted to argue, to insist she could leave, go back to her life, handle this herself. But the adrenaline was crashing now, leaving only exhaustion and terror in its wake. So she nodded. And for the first time in years, Susan Thompson let someone else carry the weight. Susan woke in a bed softer than any she'd slept in since America. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The chase, the car, Ji-hoon's fortress. She sat up slowly, taking in the guest room. Elegant, impersonal, safe. A knock at the door made her tense. "Come in," she called, her voice hoarse. Ji-hoon entered carrying a tray, tea, toast, fruit. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept, his dress shirt rumpled and collar unbuttoned. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I ran for my life." Susan accepted the tea gratefully. "Because I did." "You're safe here." He sat in the chair by the window, maintaining distance. "I had my doctor check you while you slept. Just exhaustion. No injuries." "You had a doctor." Susan started to protest, then stopped. What was the point? "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. "I have a proposition," Ji-hoon said finally. "My company needs a photographer for internal projects, product launches, corporate events, executive portraits. It's legitimate work, good pay, and it gives you cover while I neutralize the threat." Susan studied him over the rim of her cup. "And the catch? No unescorted outings until it's safe. You stay here. Let my security do their job." "So I trade one cage for another." "This cage has better amenities." His lips quirked, almost a smile. "And the door isn't locked." Despite everything, Susan felt a laugh bubble up. It came out strangled, almost hysterical, but it was something. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." 3 nights later, Susan's past came for her in dreams. The cargo hold, metal walls slick with condensation. Women and children packed like livestock, wrists zip-tied, mouths taped. The smell, sweat and fear and desperation. The branding iron, glowing crimson in the dark. Her own screams, muffled by a gag. The burn, the mark, the permanent claim on her body. Susan woke gasping, tears streaming down her face, the sheets tangled around her legs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls were closing in. A knock. Gentle. Concerned. "Susan?" Ji-hoon's voice cut through the panic. I'm fine," she managed, her voice breaking. The door opened anyway. He stood in the threshold wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair mussed, eyes alert. "You're not fine," he said simply. He crossed to the small kitchenette attached to the guest suite and began preparing tea, chamomile, honey, a practiced ritual. When it was ready, he sat in the chair by her bed, not touching, just present. "You don't have to talk about it," Ji-hoon said quietly, "but I'm here if you want to." Susan pulled her knees to her chest, the cup warming her shaking hands. "The cargo hold," she whispered. "That's where they did it. Branded us like cattle. 23 women and 4 children. I was the only one who escaped." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I watched them sell a 12-year-old girl." Susan's voice was hollow. "I couldn't stop it. Couldn't save her. I just hid in a ventilation shaft until the ship docked, then ran." "That's not weakness," Ji-hoon said firmly. "That's survival." "Is it?" Tears blurred her vision. "Because most nights, I wish I'd fought harder, died trying. Then they would have won." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're here. You're fighting. That matters." Susan met his eyes, dark, sincere, carrying their own weight of guilt. "Your family did this to me," she said softly. "I know." The words seemed to cost him. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." He stayed until she fell asleep again, the nightmare held at bay by his quiet presence. Over the following weeks, the fortress became something else. A home, a sanctuary, a space where 2 broken people learned to breathe again. Susan threw herself into the photography work Ji-hoon provided, corporate headshots and product launches, executive meetings captured in crisp black and white. She was good, really good, and Ji-hoon's employees noticed. They requested her specifically, praised her eye for detail, her ability to make even the stiffest CEO look human. Ji-hoon watched her work with quiet fascination. She transformed behind the camera, confident, commanding, fully present. The fear that shadowed her eyes disappeared when she was framing a shot, adjusting lighting, coaxing genuine smiles from reluctant subjects. "You're staring," Susan said one afternoon, lowering her camera. They were in his penthouse office, shooting portraits for the company website. Ji-hoon stood by the window, natural light casting sharp angles across his face. "You're good at this," he replied. "Flattery won't make you look less stiff." She grinned. "Relax your shoulders. Think about something that makes you happy." "I am thinking about something that makes me happy." He was looking directly at her. Susan's breath caught. The camera suddenly felt heavy in her hands. "Ji-hoon." "One more shot," he said, his voice softer now. "Then we're done." She raised the camera, but her hands weren't quite steady. Click. The photo would be perfect, but she'd never show it to anyone. It was too intimate, too real, too dangerous. They fell into a routine. Ji-hoon returned from the office around 8. They ate together, talked, shared pieces of themselves carefully, like handling broken glass. He told her about his childhood. "I was groomed to take over," Ji-hoon admitted one night. "But I couldn't. The things they did, the people they hurt." He trailed off, staring into his wine glass. "So, I built my own empire. Clean, legal. A middle finger to everything they stood for." "But you still carry the name," Susan observed. "I do." His smile was bitter. "And I'll never fully escape it." Susan reached across the table, her hand covering his. "You saved me," she said quietly. "That's not nothing." His fingers curled around hers, warm and solid. "It's not enough," Ji-hoon whispered, "but it's a start." It happened on a Friday night, 3 weeks into her stay. Ji-hoon came home earlier than usual, carrying a bottle of wine and a rare, genuine smile. "I closed the Lee account," he announced. Susan looked up from her laptop, confused. "The what?" "A business deal with one of my aunt's fronts. I've been untangling my company from her operations for years. Today, I severed the last official tie." "That's—" Susan stood slowly. "That's huge." "It's progress." He poured them both wine. "And it deserves celebrating." They toasted, talked, laughed. Real laughter. The kind that came from relief and hope. At some point, Ji-hoon pulled up music on his phone. Something soft and jazzy, instrumental. "Dance with me," he said, extending his hand. "I don't—" Susan started to protest. "Neither do I." His smile was boyish, disarming. "So we'll be terrible together." She took his hand. They swayed in the living room, clumsy and unpracticed, his hand warm against the small of her back, carefully avoiding the brand beneath her shirt. Susan rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "Seeing me." She pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. "Not as a victim, not as a survivor. Just me." Ji-hoon's hand came up, cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "You're extraordinary, Susan Thompson." The kiss was inevitable, soft, tentative, tasting of wine and vulnerability and the terrifying possibility of healing. When they broke apart, Susan's eyes were wet. "This is a bad idea," she said, even as her hands fisted in his shirt. "Terrible," Ji-hoon agreed, his forehead resting against hers. They kissed again anyway. Later that week, Susan found the files by accident. She was looking for printer paper in Ji-hoon's home office when she knocked over a stack of folders. Papers scattered across the floor, reports, photographs, spreadsheets. She bent to gather them, then froze. Her own face stared back at her from a surveillance photo, date-stamped 3 months ago, before the auction, before the rescue. He'd been watching her, investigating her. Heart pounding, Susan rifled through the other files. Lee Trafficking Network, survivor documentation, dozens of women, all with the Crimson brand, all tracked, documented, their movements logged with clinical precision. Some were marked deceased, others missing. A few, including Susan, were labeled active/protected. She was still staring at the files when Ji-hoon came home. He stopped in the doorway, seeing her crouched on the floor, surrounded by papers, her expression a mix of betrayal and fury. "Susan, you've been watching me for months." Her voice shook. "Before the auction, before any of this, you knew exactly where I was." "Yes." He didn't deny it, didn't make excuses. "I've been tracking survivors for 2 years, trying to build a case against my aunt. You were one of them." "So what am I?" Susan stood, papers clutched in her fists. "A project? A means to an end?" "No." Ji-hoon stepped forward, urgent. "That's not— Then what?" The papers scattered again as she threw them down. "Why didn't you approach me sooner? Why wait until I was exposed?" "Because I didn't want to traumatize you." His composure cracked. "You'd built a life, found safety. Who was I to rip that away by showing up and forcing you to relive the worst thing that ever happened to you?" Susan's breath came into harsh gasps. "I was going to tell you," Ji-hoon continued, his voice quieter now. I needed you to trust me first." "Trust?" Susan laughed bitterly. "How can I trust someone who's been lying from the start?" "I never lied. I just omitted, manipulated, controlled." She grabbed her camera bag. "Just like they did." "Susan, please. I need air." She pushed past him, out of the apartment, into the elevator before he could stop her. The doors closed on Ji-hoon's devastated expression, and Susan descended alone. Tears streaming down her face, wondering if she'd ever truly escaped her cage at all. 2 days of cold silence. Susan stayed in the guest room. Ji-hoon worked late at the office. They circled each other like wounded animals, neither willing to be the first to break. Then the invitation arrived. Madam Lee was hosting a formal dinner at her estate, and Park Ji-hoon, along with his guest, was expected to attend. "I have to go," Ji-hoon said, standing in the doorway of Susan's room. "It's a quarterly board meeting for the family's legitimate holdings. If I don't show, it raises suspicion." Susan didn't look up from her laptop. "So go. Come with me." Now she looked up incredulous. "You want me to walk into your aunt's house? The woman who branded me?" "She doesn't know who you are. You were cargo, not a person. They didn't keep faces. Just inventory numbers." His voice was bitter. "To her, you'd be just another date I brought to a boring dinner." "And if she recognizes the brand?" "She won't see it. You'll be dressed formally, covered." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. "I wouldn't ask if there was another option, but going alone after bringing you here, it would raise questions I can't afford to answer yet." Susan wanted to refuse, to tell him to handle his family drama alone. But beneath the anger, she understood. They were both trapped in this now. "Fine," she said flatly, "but we're not okay." "I know." Madam Lee's estate was a monument to blood money, traditional Korean architecture blended with modern luxury, tiled roofs curving over marble floors, a koi pond surrounded by imported Italian statuary. Beauty built on suffering. Susan felt sick the moment they arrived. Ji-hoon's hand rested lightly on her back as they entered, a gesture that could be possessive or protective, depending on who was watching. "Stay close," he murmured. "Don't engage unless spoken to directly." Susan nodded, her expression carefully neutral. The dinner guests were exactly what she expected. Old money, new criminals, everyone pretending the blood on their hands was just red wine. And presiding over it all, Madam Lee, about 60 years old, elegant in Chanel, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Ji-hoon," she greeted her nephew with cool affection. And you've brought a guest. How unexpected. Her eyes raked over Susan with surgical precision. Madam Lee, this is Susan Thompson. Susan, my aunt. Susan bowed slightly, keeping her expression respectful. It's an honor. Is it? Madam Lee's smile didn't reach her eyes. Tell me, Miss Thompson, how does an American— She paused, letting the word drip with subtle disdain. Find herself in Seoul. I'm a photographer, Susan replied evenly. I work for Mr. Park's company. A photographer. Madam Lee's laugh was crystalline and cruel. How artistic. And tell me, what does my nephew photograph? His conscience? The table went silent. Ji-hoon's hand tightened imperceptibly against Susan's back. I photograph products, executives, events, Susan said, refusing to break eye contact. Though I imagine capturing conscience would require it to exist first. Someone choked on their wine. Madam Lee's expression went glacial. Ji-hoon, she said softly, dangerously. Where did you find this one, the bargain bin? Ji-hoon's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Say something, Susan thought desperately. Defend me. Tell her I'm more than— But he stayed silent. Strategic silence. Calculated. Necessary to maintain his cover. Susan knew that intellectually. Emotionally, it felt like betrayal. They didn't speak during the car ride home. Susan stared out the window, her hands clenched in her lap, the echo of Madam Lee's laughter ringing in her ears. The bargain bin. When they reached the apartment, she headed straight for the guest room. Susan, wait! Don't. She spun to face him. Don't explain. Don't justify. I get it, okay? You had to play your part. I did. Ji-hoon's composure was cracking. If I'd defended you, if I'd shown any real attachment, she would have used you against me, made you a target. I'm already a target. Susan's voice broke. I have been since the moment that strap slipped. Your aunt didn't recognize me tonight, but she will, and when she does, I won't let her hurt you. How? Susan laughed bitterly. By staying silent while she humiliates me? By pretending I'm just another disposable thing you picked up for fun? That's not fair. None of this is fair. Tears streamed down her face now. Your family did this to me. Your family's money built that house. Your family's signature is burned into my skin. And you knew about all of it. You could have stopped them years ago, but you didn't. I was building a case, Ji-hoon said desperately. I needed evidence, time. And in the meantime, how many women were branded, sold, killed? Susan's voice dropped to a whisper. How many while you stayed silent? The question hung between them like a blade. I'm trying to make it right, Ji-hoon said, his voice breaking. I know. Susan's anger dissolved into exhaustion. But I can't be here anymore. I can't. I need space. She grabbed her jacket. Susan, don't. It's not safe. I'll take my chances. She walked out the door. And this time Ji-hoon didn't follow. Susan made it 3 blocks before they grabbed her. The van came out of nowhere, screeching to a halt beside her. Hands seized her arms, dragging her backward as she screamed. A cloth pressed over her mouth, sweet, chemical, suffocating. The world tilted, blurred, went dark. Susan woke to the smell of mildew and old blood. Her head throbbed. Her wrists were zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of a warehouse, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. And across from her, sitting in a chair of her own like a queen on a throne, was Madam Lee. Hello, my dear. The older woman's smile was venomous. I thought your face looked familiar at dinner. It took me a few hours, but I finally placed you. Susan's blood turned to ice. Shipment 47, March 2023. You were one of the fighters, scratched up 2 of my men before they subdued you. I remember thinking we should have just thrown you overboard. Madam Lee stood, circling slowly. But you escaped, caused me significant financial loss, and now You've ensnared my nephew. He doesn't care about me, Susan lied desperately. Oh, but he does. Madame Lee's laugh was light, airy. I saw it tonight. The way he looked at you. The way he tensed when I mocked you. Ji-hoon may have distanced himself from the family business, but he's still a Park. And Parks protect what's theirs. She leaned down, her face inches from Susan's. So let's see just how much you're worth to him. Ji-hoon received the video at midnight. Susan, bound and bloodied, Madame Lee's voice purring off camera. You have 24 hours to transfer complete control of your company to me, or she dies. Slowly. He watched it once, twice. Then he made a call. Assemble the team. I'm done playing nice. Ji-hoon had been preparing for this moment for 2 years. Evidence compiled. Authorities contacted. Escape routes mapped. But all of that was contingent on careful timing, legal process, doing things the right way. Tonight he abandoned the plan. Tonight he went to war. The warehouse was on Seoul's outskirts, industrial district, surrounded by abandoned factories. Ji-hoon's team, private security, ex-military, loyal to him, not the family, breached 3 entry points simultaneously. Madame Lee's guards were skilled, but they were expecting legal pressure, drawn-out battles. Not this. Ji-hoon moved through the warehouse like a storm, focused, relentless, every carefully cultivated corporate restraint and stripped away to reveal the fighter underneath. He found Susan in the central room, still bound to the chair, Madame Lee standing over her with a knife. One more step and I cut her throat, Madame Lee said calmly. Ji-hoon froze. You've ruined everything, his aunt continued, her composure finally cracking. Years of work, generations of legacy, all for some American nobody. She's not nobody. Ji-hoon's voice was steel. And you're finished. Am I? Madame Lee pressed the blade against Susan's throat. Because from where I stand, Susan moved, her hands partially freed, the zip ties sawed through on the chair's rough edge while Madame Lee monologued, snapped up, catching the older woman's wrist. They struggled. The knife clattered away. Ji-hoon lunged forward, pulling Susan from the chair as his security team swarmed in, subduing Madame Lee. She screamed, not in fear, but rage, a lifetime of control unraveling in seconds. This isn't over, she shrieked as they dragged her away. The family will destroy you, both of you. But Ji-hoon wasn't listening. He was cradling Susan's face in his hands, checking her injuries, split lip, bruised cheek, but alive, whole, here. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Shut up, Susan said, and she kissed him. Desperate, grateful, real. 3 days later, Park Ji-hoon stood before a wall of cameras and reporters. The press conference was held at his company headquarters, broadcast live across South Korea and streaming internationally. Behind him, projected on a massive screen, was evidence, financial records, shipping manifests, testimony from survivors, including Susan, whose face was obscured, but whose words rang clear and true. For 30 years, Ji-hoon began, his voice steady, my family has operated a human trafficking network under the guise of legitimate business. My aunt, Madame Lee Park, oversaw this operation directly, trafficking hundreds of women and children through Seoul's ports. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I am complicit. The words seemed to cost him. I knew. Not the full scope, but enough, and I stayed silent while I built a case, prioritizing legal strategy over immediate action. That silence allowed suffering to continue, lives to be destroyed. He looked directly into the cameras. Today, I'm turning over all evidence to prosecutors. My aunt is in custody. The trafficking network is being dismantled. And I am pledging my entire personal fortune, every one I possess, to establishing a foundation for survivors. Legal support, medical care, housing, education. whatever they need to rebuild. A reporter shouted a question. What about your company? It will continue operating under independent oversight, Ji-hoon replied. I'm stepping down as CEO to focus on rehabilitation efforts and cooperating with authorities. I will testify. I will answer for my silence. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. Another question, why come forward now? Ji-hoon's expression softened. Because someone I love helped me understand that doing things the right way was just another excuse for inaction. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better. Susan watched the press conference from a private hospital room. She was there for observation, mostly exhaustion, minor injuries, but the doctors wanted to monitor her. Make sure there were no complications from the drugs Madam Lee's men had used. Ji-hoon arrived an hour after the press conference ended, still wearing his suit, looking exhausted and oddly vulnerable. That was brave, Susan said quietly. It was necessary. He sat in the chair beside her bed. I should have done it years ago. Maybe. She reached for his hand. But you did it now. That counts. Ji-hoon's thumb traced circles on her palm. I love you, he said suddenly. I don't know when it happened. Maybe when you told me to shut up before kissing me, maybe weeks before that. But I do. And I understand if you can't forgive what my family did, what I didn't stop. Ji-hoon. Susan squeezed his hand. Stop. He fell silent. I'm not going to pretend this is easy, Susan continued, her voice soft but steady. Your family's mark is on my body. That doesn't just disappear because you held a press conference. Ji-hoon's shoulders tensed, bracing for rejection. But, Susan said, pulling him closer, you're not your family. You proved that. You risked everything. Your company, your reputation, your safety. To save me. To save people like me. Tears welled in Ji-hoon's eyes. I don't know what we are, Susan admitted, or what will be, but I know I want to find out. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. I'll spend every day earning that, he whispered. I promise. I know, Susan said simply. And when they kissed this time, it tasted like forgiveness, like possibility, like the tentative, terrifying hope of healing. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story touched you, inspired you, or took you on a journey, don't leave without hitting the like button. Subscribe if you haven't and switch your notifications on. You don't want to miss what I got coming up. Make sure to drop in the comment section where in the world you're watching from. We're building a global community of story lovers here, and your voice is part of it. See you in the next one. Have a great day.